some projects, if they don't have the lofty design goals, there's still a part of it you can embrace that is, the change we're making here is affecting this person's life on a daily basis, and there's the satisfaction to be had in that. It's sort of finding the layers of architecture that are not just the design solution.
Right.
It's finding satisfaction in other ways of solving the problem.
Welcome to Architecture, Design, and Photography. Today we have Kevin Moquin, architect here in Portland, Maine, a Maine licensed architect. Kevin is a member of the American Institute of Architects as well as the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association and a founding board member of the Portland Society of Architecture. He's also an adjunct professor and design review guest critic in the architecture program at the University of Maine, Augusta. Don't miss Kevin's AIA Design Theory in the upcoming September issue of Maine Home Design. Thank you for coming into the studio today, Kevin. Which, by the way, we were talking about the article you wrote, and it sounds pretty interesting. And it's around Louis Kahn's Exeter Library, which is an incredible piece of architecture. So the things you talk about kind of come off of that. So please check it out. It should be very interesting. It might be an article I actually read.
All right. Yeah. And it's a place you can visit. It's an hour away.
Oh, yeah. As I was saying, I stumbled across it on a photo shoot years ago, and it's just, when you walk in, it's just astounding. It's on the level of seeing the Pantheon for the first time in Rome.
Right.
I'm getting that right. I always mix up Parthenon, Pantheon, but it's Pantheon. And that is one of the most incredible spaces that I've ever been in, and it wasn't until I went into Exeter Library that I thought, this is also very incredible. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a building on the world stage of architecture.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you went to architecture school, so you have a course where they teach you construction drawings. That was the building that we did for our construction drawings course. So
Really?
That was my introduction to it.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Sort of drafting it, and at that point it was ink on Mylar for me.
Oh, man.
CAD was an elective at that point. But that was my introduction to it, and since moving to Maine and having it so close, that was kind of a yearly pilgrimage for a while, and then
Do you ever go down there and just sketch it and just kind of soak it in?
Yeah, I go down there and soak it in. There was one of the other professors at UMA was doing a field trip with his class down there, so we brought my class down there as well and joined them and just sort of walked around it and experienced it with the students.
Oh, so with the students that you interact with at UMA, you take them down there as a field trip to observe this incredible piece of architecture.
Well, that semester their structures class
Yeah.
had it as a field trip, and I was like, "Oh, you guys have to go on this too, and I'll join you down there."
Now, what classes do you teach and guest crit in there at UMA?
I teach ARC 305, which is a third-year design studio.
Oh, cool.
So that's really that's the course where the students learn how to design. And I've been a guest critic for design studios from first year through fourth year.
Yeah.
Fifth year.
How harsh are the crits there?
It depends on the critic.
Anyone
tend not
throw
to be
any
a
models
harsh-
or rip any drawings down?
I've never made anybody cry. I know some critics have, but
Really?
I'm not a harsh critic. I try to think of what can I bring to this conversation that's constructive
Right.
for the student, because it's really a learning experience for them, and it's you don't learn much from the tears.
Right. Yeah, the school that I went to was pretty. It was pretty soft on crits. I was probably in my mind far more critical of my own work and the other students' work that was put up than the professors were, and I think a lot of that was that it was a religious university, and they were probably, trying to be a little Christ-like going on, and
Yes.
rather than what is this? What are you doing?
Yeah.
But what do you really get out of teaching? What is the fulfillment from that for you, and why were you drawn to that?
Yeah. Well, so the practice of architecture is very different from how you learn to do architecture in school. The studio experience is all about how creative can I be? How can I push the design? It's not burdened with budgets or conservative clients.
Right.
So I think as an architect, you've got to figure out a way to resolve that, what you loved about design in the studio environment in school and what it's like to practice architecture in the real world.
Sure.
So getting into teaching was a way to kind of keep that side of the design process alive, the more theoretical, the more
Right.
risk-taking.
So what you're saying is the practice of architecture is horrible, and the only way to still enjoy it is to go back
right.
and teach.
It can be horrible, and you have to find a way to practice architecture and not have it be horrible, because
Right.
if you want every project to be pushing your abilities like those studio projects, you're going to be disappointed sometimes. So you have
Right.
to sort of find a way to still enjoy architecture, even though it's different than you once learned it. And
Right.
that's kind of letting those projects that are really going to be high design be that, but not force that model on everything that's on your desk.
Sure.
Some things
Sure.
aren't necessarily headed there, and it's just a disappointment to try and force them into that mold
Right.
if they're not destined for it.
Now, I did well in my architecture class. I was near the top, if not at the top, but did not succeed as an architect. Okay, so it's interesting to me. Why do they structure architecture school in that way, that it does not actually mirror the practice of architecture as much?
Yeah, I
right?
joke they're training you to do something that very few people want and even fewer people can afford, in a sense.
Right.
But I think I do agree with the way it's structured, because you kind of have to learn how to sort of break through that barrier, push beyond with your design approach to come back and do competent buildings in the real world. You know, you have to have gone past all of those limits you're going to be saddled with to then again do a good job once you have to work within those limits. So I think if you never go past that threshold, then you don't get there with the design of it when you have to work with all of those constraints.
Right. Yeah, I really enjoyed architecture school and having some constraint, very limited constraints that they'd put on us for the projects, but then thinking and working creatively within a compressed amount of time to solve these problems and come up with a solution, and then you were on to the next thing. But in the real world, it was so incredibly limiting for me, and so saddled with so much to do with running an office, managing client, like all these other things that I just am not skilled at, and so I found myself wandering out of architecture into architectural photography, which suits me very well. And if I had to do it over, I'd still do an architecture education, and because I really appreciate that. But how have you found and been able to stay in and be successful at being an architect, going from the idealized world of school to then actually practicing, sitting in someone else's studio for years on end, and now starting your own firm and making a living and doing well at it?
Yeah, I think it's just finding the joy in the solution that's in front of you. So some projects, if they don't have the lofty design goals, there's still a part of it you can embrace that is, the change we're making here is affecting this person's life on a daily basis, and there's a satisfaction to be had in that. So it's sort of finding the layers of architecture that are not just the design solutions or the pushing the design to its limit. It's finding the satisfaction in other ways of solving the problem.
Yeah, the kind of the effect down the line that design implements into people's lives to a degree.
Yeah.
And it's interesting for me that I over the past 4 years worked on a design for our house, and then had a pretty good concept, but there was a lot of shortcomings that we then passed it off to Caleb's office to fix all the things that I because I don't practice architecture on. they're like, your master bedroom's way too narrow. What are you thinking? And so they massaged and then detailed out and fixed all of that up for me. And, it's really an experience to live now in a place that was, thought of, like every aspect of it was thought about in a way that, I understood how my family lived, what we wanted, what we desired out of life, and how the building works as a conduit for that.
Yeah.
And we a year and a half in, we're still just constantly talking about how nice it is that everything works and accommodates us like a well-oiled machine that was designed for us, rather than kind of running into all these hard edges of someone else's design for some other problem or a generic solution to a very complex problem of what a family needs. And it's really nice to be able to experience that.
Yeah, and if you can sort of, through living there, recognize that the architect that you worked with thought about what is it going to be like to live there, to sort of design for that experience, that process of design is valid. That's not anything to do with style or progressive or conservative. It's, that's a layer of design that's should be present in everything that's designed.
Right.
And kind of in shaping my firm and my approach, I had conversations with colleagues of, is it a compromise to design when it's not pushed to the front of the line every second of the day, which is kind of what it was like in studio. And it's,
Right.
but it's not about that. It's just about doing that. That's still very much a part of the practice. And I have projects where design is still at the front line, and I embrace those as that. I just don't try to force every project into that mold. That's sort of how I've found a way to stay enthusiastic about architecture, or not let the projects that don't fit that mold bring me down.
Right.
I find the thing in each project that
There's still a huge amount of service that you're helping someone, live in that. You're easing human suffering to a
Yes,
large
that's right.
degree.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
this, massive part of their life, this massive tool for them living through.
Right.
And if it's a residence, or work through. So.
And I have this personality thing where I like to defy stereotypes. Architects are stereotypically late all the time, and I'm painfully punctual. In fact, I joke that they're going to strip my credentials because I'm too punctual.
Right.
But another one of those is sort of the architect forcing their will on their clients, and
Yeah.
that's another one. I don't want any part of that. I like to defy that
Right.
stereotype as well.
Yeah, it's working on a budget within limits and still meeting the needs. It's a really hard thing, because not very many people can even come close to affording financially what architects offer, and
Right.
and to offer a completely reduced package of services is really undercutting a lot of what the value of an architect is at the same time. And it was very interesting on our, relatively very small budget in working with an architect, that I went into it with the preconceived idea of every part of this building, if it's not a part that we have a high value to us in, it's going to be kept extremely basic.
Yeah.
So the floor plan is a rectangle, the exterior walls, it's a rectangle, and it's a 2-pitch roof. We were able to put on, a standing seam roof for not much more than a shingle roof. There's no valleys or anything, and so we really invested in windows on one side. We have a really nice piece of land, and the rest of it was like windows and like foot-thick walls filled with cellulose for insulation.
Good.
Instead of having a basement, for a bunch of added storage, we're slab on grade, and just concrete floors and pine floors upstairs. So we really maximized the pleasantries that we could in specific areas, and went extremely basic everywhere else we could.
Yeah.
And just by having that thoughtful approach, for us, we got something that really works nice for us.
Yeah, and I think it's challenging the myth that it has to be expensive to be good. It's just, spend the money in the places where it makes the most sense.
Right.
And it has to be thoughtful. And, that's what it takes to be good. It's not contingent on the budget. It's just easier with a bigger budget.
Right. I find that there's less, on a really big budget, you have to be careful that you don't lose interest. To me, like the projects that we did or the projects that I found interesting were the ones that were highly creative on a limited budget. Because then you had we went to the town dump and recycled things and used them in a beautiful manner. To me, that's really interesting. If it's an endless budget, I almost feel like, well, anyone can do that,
Yeah, and it's not uncommon for projects to get better after the value engineering phase. So that
love that term. I ran into that 6 years ago. I was like, value what? Yeah. What did you improve here? And it's like, no, we cut it.
You cut it, but usually you end up cutting out some things and thinking really hard about how to make it work without those things, and usually it's a pretty positive result from that process.
Yeah.
I certainly recall a number of projects that have come out better in the end once they've
even after
stripped
value
out
engineering.
That's right.
Okay, so an out of left field question for you. If you could solve one mystery, what would it be?
Oh boy.
Or have one question answered. And this could be in the field of architecture, or it could be about the nature of the consciousness of cows. I don't know. There's got to be one just sitting obviously right on top of your head that you're filtering right now.
Yeah, the filtering one is would love to know about life out in the universe other than humans.
Yeah, that would be.
I
would love to know because it's all stardust, kind of whatever.
Yeah.
If something else evolved, billions of light years away, it has the same. We're assuming physical laws. Does the same stuff evolve? But then you look at our history and if there hadn't been mass extinction events, would other types of animals evolve to this present state rather than us? So would there be some reptilian form of higher consciousness rather than mammalian?
Right.
There's
and
those
there's
questions.
So much out there that
yeah. I think we're close to relatively close to starting to interact with some stuff like that there seems to be far more realistic, not laughable questions and conversations around those topics.
Yeah.
So who knows? Hopefully. I listened to Joe Rogan podcast on some of the conversations he's had with Bob Lazar and a couple other people that were just completely laughed out of the public conversation in the 80s that have now come back up through technical discoveries of the things they were saying have been shown to be true. What else, that they said has been of interest?
Yeah, well, and I think, that question was in my mind because recently there was an article in the paper. The Air Force has established a written protocol for their pilots to report UFO sightings.
But they don't call them UFOs.
That's
they
right,
call them
something else.
Something anomalies or
that's
something.
Right.
UAFs or I don't
right.
know. United USA. Back to design. This is ridiculous, right?
Pulled us into outer space here.
So a big part of your practice is restoring mid-century homes and buildings. Has there been one project in Maine that you have been particularly proud of?
Well, you know what? I would not say that's a big part of my practice, but that's an aspirational part of my practice. I've been trying to develop that as part of my practice, although I have not discovered as much traction with that as I would like.
In redoing them, are you of the mindset you want to restore them to their original glory, or is it a conserve the exterior for the prosperity of the continuity of the region, but then go modern on the inside? How do you approach those things?
No, I think I really love the mid-century design, and my approach to that was sort of offering sympathetic additions and renovations. So
And
improvements
by
to
mid-century, are we talking like 60s,
so
50s?
40s to 60s ish. The case study houses
Right.
and things like that.
Do we have a lot of those in Maine? It seems like that was kind of a dead time for Maine, where there wasn't a lot of like nuclear ranch kind of stuff or anything like that.
There's a good amount of that in Maine.
Really?
In fact, I had developed a spreadsheet of the address of a place. As I'd driven by it, I'd note it down, and so I probably had 70 houses in the greater Portland area. In fact,
cool.
when Landmark started their mid-century modern program recently, I've passed that off to them. Just of here's what I've found.
Hey, here's a list
in the neighborhood. And actually, one of the things I did to try and kick that sort of side of my practice off was I sent all of those people a little letter. I was like, I like your house, a little introduction
So
to
you have
me
a
and what I
list of
do.
like 70 homes long, and
That's
you
right.
went to the trouble of finding their. Well, I guess you. This is from you driving by, so you have their address.
That's right.
And everything.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I thought, okay, if I want to make this a part of my practice, how do I develop that? It should start with the people who live in those houses,
right.
because they may have some appreciation.
I
of it.
do love the nuclear ranch. It's such a oddly interesting feel to me. I don't know why it is, but that exploration out of the craftsman style and everything else to coming into this retro modern, what we call retro modern kind of thing is really
people
neat.
were living in more open spaces and
And they were
less
utilizing
formal
all
and-
those new materials
Yeah.
and pushing and pulling them to create these weird things.
So the mass mailing didn't generate any projects, but I had a number of calls of, wow, it was great to receive your letter. I'm glad you like my house. We're not thinking of making any changes, but if you want to come over and see it, come on over. So I, visited with a number of people who.
You should start a like a blog or YouTube channel just around like exploring these houses and talking about them and stuff.
Yeah,
That's
that would
interesting.
Be fun, but
I mean, I imagine there's just a glut of them. Like I imagine in California.
Yeah.
But like for around here, I would imagine it would have taken someone with a fairly creative disposition outside of the norm to do that here at that
That's
time.
right. There's a lot of inertia in New England for New England typical architecture.
Right.
So there was somebody building a handful of them in the 40s and the 50s around the greater Portland area. So
Huh. Cool.
some of them have suffered difficult fates since then. There's definitely some on that list that have lost a lot of their mid-century flair. They've been with renovations that
Vinyl
siding and vinyl windows with grills between the glass.
Pet peeves for architects and architecture students. How do you design a healthy home on a conservative budget? What are some tricks of the trade for you?
Yeah, the trick of the trade there is to, work on the insulation and, get that house to perform in an energy efficient way. So it's kind of on a limited budget. You're going to spend some of that budget on things you don't see, but there are also things that are really hard to improve later.
Right.
So get good insulation in the cap and the foundation and the walls and get the best windows you can afford and create a shell that performs well, and you can improve the things that all of that insulation contains down the road. But that stuff is kind of a decision that's made for 75 years or more.
The eternity of the home, essentially.
Yeah.
What are your standards for something that makes a great project? Like you see something, you think, wow, this is a great project. What are the key things for you that make it stand out?
Yeah, I think it's thoughtful use of space, consideration of how the light enters. I like to think about how the space is going to evolve as it's used, or how the materials are going to weather as the house ages or as someone lives there. But I think, each project is kind of tailored to its individual owner, so that benchmark actually kind of changes for every project in a way.
Sure.
And what it really is emerges through that dialogue with the client. What their values go a long way to shape what makes it successful or not.
Right.
So it's probably the real answer to your question is what makes it is a thoughtful interaction and investigation on my part in what the values of the client I'm working with are.
If you're to poll one architect from history,
Carlo Scarpa.
Carl, I know that name, but is he Finnish?
He's Italian.
Italian.
Yeah.
Okay. Different
I'm sorry,
latitude.
I preempted your question. That may be the wrong answer. I should let you finish.
No. Is he finished doing architecture? That's what I was gonna. Now, why him? And is he the one that you pick from history as making an impact in your eyes?
Yeah, definitely. He's, I don't quite believe in idols, I guess, but if I had an idol, it would be him.
A little statue of Scarpa.
Yeah, but his work was, it was sort of timeless and futuristic all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
At one moment it could look like a ruin, and then from another angle it might look like a spaceship. But he was also a master of bringing materials together, so the way he detailed the connections between things like a handrail and where it bends to go down the stairs, or the way different materials on the facade came together. So he worked in Venice primarily and in that region of Italy, so there were places where plaster might meet brick, and so he was really a master of detailing connections, and so that was something that really intrigued me about his work.
And when was he active?
He was active in the 40s, 50s, 60s, although not at all mid-century. I believe he died in early 70s, maybe, 70.
Have you visited many of his projects?
Yeah, I visited a number of his projects in and around Venice.
And what was that like?
Yeah, it's just beautiful to see it in person because you get a impression of the tactile quality of all of those materials where in a photograph, the photographer was going to try and capture that, but seeing it in person and actually being able to touch it, sort of,
right?
It is as a real tactile experience.
And when you visited them, did you have anyone with you that knew nothing about all the stuff that you were interested in, and how did that go over?
Well, the first time I visited was we did a semester in Europe when I was in college. So
you were amongst a bunch of other architecture geeks and
architecture students. Yeah, so we were all into it. But then my wife and I, we had our honeymoon there, and so I visited those again with her.
For your honeymoon, you dragged her around to a bunch of architecture.
That's right.
Significant architecture.
And we balanced that out with, there were a bunch of gardens that she wanted to see. So,
so she's into gardening. And okay.
Although she did sort of put her foot down and say she was done with churches at some point in that trip. We stopped doing that. But
and I believe we had talked about this years ago, but you're more of an atheistic disposition, right?
Yeah, I would say.
In that spectrum, we'll leave it there.
I believe in humanity.
Yeah.
Common humanity.
There's no denying humanity.
That's right, yeah.
How is it for you going through, is there kind of a conflict, an internal conflict in a way, when you look at all this architecture around sacred and everything else, but then having a worldview that is in conflict with that to a degree? I mean,
no, I don't think that there is. I mean, in a sense, sort of that was the means to create those spaces. That religion is what inspired those architects to do what they did, and that it's sort of a spiritual experience with any spirituality coming through the door,
right?
In a sense, like
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that the words I would use would be more it's uh, awe and wonder that
Yeah.
inspired them, and religion was the conduit through them expressing that.
Yeah.
And we still have awe and wonder today. The continual exploration of further truth, I think, is highly expressed in art and architecture and music, and creativity. I think that is the most profound. Is the creativity around discerning further truth. And I was just having an interesting conversation around this yesterday with the assistant that I work with all the time, Corey DeRocher, in that there's this idea of if religion is kind of an encapsulation of your projected ideas of what's out in the unknown, in the awe and the wonder of it. You project out into there an idea of what you think all that is that's unknown, but still reaching to you in an inspiring way. And his argument was that, you run into too many times people saying, don't look into that in a scientific manner because it'll take the awe and wonder away. Where I look at that and I want the awe and wonder for me is to explore that more in a scientific and exploratory manner, either through creativity or a scientific manner, to understand it more, because I don't feel that there's any end to it. It's an infinite process that I think each of us is called to exploring endlessly. So.
Right. I mean, knowing scientifically why there are all the colors in the sunset doesn't make it less wonderful, right?
Yeah.
It's the experience of it is still wonderful, even if you know the science or, the rainbow, or there's...
Right.
I mean, knowing that's, something can evolve or develop in such a way is still wonderful. It's still, I think I would say, that wonder is preserved independent of knowing how it got there scientifically.
Right. So we had talked about that, but going out on your own as an architect, why go out on your own rather than work for someone else? And how's that experience been for you?
Yeah, it's a great experience. I think it's, the schedule is mine to control, which is nice, so I can develop a realistic work-life balance, to whatever that means to me. Although I've been lucky that as an employee, all the places that I've worked have had a pretty realistic view on work-life balance.
Yep.
But that's a big part of it, is just kind of control your own destiny. Another layer of it is just kind of having total stylistic control over what I do. So if I'm, painted into a corner, I've gotten myself there. I haven't been directed there by some superior, and in some ways that's easier to work with. But a lot of it is just to, kind of control your own destiny.
Right. And what are the pitfalls and stresses for you personally, being self-employed in that manner, in a creative field? That this is an interesting subject to me because of I'm self-employed in a creative field, and there's a lot of stresses that come with it.
Yeah, and so I'm self-employed, and I'm the entire office. So, bookkeeper, janitor, architect, draftsperson. I'm doing it all. But the challenges are, how do you keep work coming through the door? How do you keep clients calling? That's probably the most stressful part of it. And I think as, especially as a sole proprietor, you can get wrapped up into doing the work. I have to get all this stuff done, and lose sight of, I also have to at the same time keep the work coming in.
Market, and then just vision for the company. Where's it going?
Vision for the company. Where is it going? Am I doing the kind of projects I want? Or, I need this project, but should I say no to it because I don't want more projects like that? There's that fork in the road you encounter sometimes.
Right.
Right now we're lucky because the climate is pretty robust for architecture and residential architecture, which is primarily what my firm does.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, the economy and everything else right now seems to be very favorable. What's your take on that? Any concern? Any omens or?
well, there's nothing that I can predict, but right, history says it's going to slow down again at some
Right.
point. I'm not one that can forecast when that's going to happen. Personally, for my business model, where it's a mix of both new construction and renovation, I find the renovation projects are strong even in a down economy because people focus on improving what they have.
Right.
And maybe fewer people are building something new, but I found that balance works for me.
What's your advice for someone wanting to go out on their own?
Yeah, my advice for someone wanting to go out on their own is, try a lot of different things. I had a good stretch of my career where, every September in 3 years I was looking for a new job. I sort of would, get bored or want to find a new challenge. And so I think, but that's the only way or can experience the variety of what's available to you out there. So I would say, don't be afraid to do that, which was tough in my family because, so I have a father who worked at the same place almost his entire life. He was retired after 30 some odd years, and I have a brother who's on the same track, and another brother he's a structural engineer, but he's kind of on the same track. He's worked at the same place since he's graduated from college, so.
How many cars have you owned throughout your life?
Oh, man.
A lot. Do you find that you seek change in your normal life a lot as well?
Well, definitely when I was younger, I went through a lot of cars. I keep them longer now, and I like cars, so I definitely look at cars a lot.
Yeah.
I'd love to have a classic car.
Well, my wife points out that I think I've personally, just like the car I drive, have owned more than the years we've been married. Since we've been married in 17. I have this disposition that, like, I'm self-employed very much for the same reasons you're saying, as far as like being in control of your schedule. So, when I was working in an office, it just felt like a death sentence for me, or at least imprisonment. Because it's like, nope, you need to stay at that desk, and if anyone looks, you need to be working on that project. And there's different personality types where someone can find a lot of surety and comfort in that kind of arrangement, and can know that they're being a very highly they're contributing very highly to a culture of a company and everything else, in a business, and they're a great part of a community that's doing something. But I constantly feel like this weird outlier that needs to be changing what I'm doing a lot, and exploring and creating and doing it on my own terms. And if I have a steady paycheck, it doesn't feel good.
Right.
There's an oddness to it that I think predisposes me to being self-employed and being not a good employee.
Yeah. Well, and I think in a creative profession, and if you're, running into a wall in your creative process, as the person in charge, you can let yourself out for the afternoon and go do something else instead of being expected to stay at that desk until
What
5 or
do you
6
find
o'clock.
for you that rejuvenates your creativity?
Yeah, walk in the woods usually, or just a walk around the old port.
Yeah.
But I find walking is kind of the rejuvenating thing. Or, pickleball is a hobby of mine.
My parents have gotten into that big time.
Yeah. It's a pretty strong pickleball community.
It's like
in
halfway
Portland.
between tennis and ping pong.
Yeah,
Like,
that's right. Yeah, it's a
the
silly
mid.
game. It's a plastic ball and a paddle.
Like a big wooden panel.
But go and play for a bit and sort of focus on the game and let the design process just percolate in the background. I
Right.
think that's kind of the important thing, is being able to allow that time for thoughts to simmer and let them emerge instead of.
Yeah, I was fine that I'll get to a point with something that I'm working on, and I'll feel just like it's a log jam,
Yeah.
and I'll feel emotionally it's a difficult feeling, and it kind of brings me down, but I can sense that now.
Yeah.
And I'll take time to, like, all right, I need to back off of this, do something else, go rejuvenate myself, take some time, take a week, whatever, and allow these things to simmer in the back of my mind.
I'll usually set the goal to get a design to a certain point, to then intentionally leave it overnight or for a couple of days to
come back to
it sort of. And sometimes it's work on it long enough to identify those sticking points,
mm-hmm.
and then put it aside and kind of find a way through those sticking points subconsciously for a bit, and then come back to it.
Yeah, it's kind of, you're in the shower and then all of a sudden eureka!
Yeah, or for me it's the middle of the night, try to fall back asleep and solving something.
That's the worst.
So get up and write it down. Yeah.
So 10 years from now, what are you going to wish that you did more of, and what are you going to wish that you did less of?
That's a good question too. I try to keep a good balance. I've thought of that question a lot, and so 10 years ago, when we had our child, our first son.
You have two kids?
I have one son.
One son?
So he's 10 now, and so 10 years ago, I decided I'm not going to.
When did he turn 10?
March 12th.
My son just turned 10 June 14th.
Okay, that's a fun age.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We got him a Lego set that's only for 10-year-olds.
Oh, yeah, he would be excited about that. My son would be excited about that. So I decided then that 10 years from now, I'm not going to wish I spent more time. That's one of the other benefits of the sole proprietorship, is there's something at school, or I feel like picking him up from school that day, I can go and do it. So
now, do you find, though, that being a sole proprietor, you can also justify spending more time at work sometimes? Like, I worry that I'm doing that sometimes.
Yeah, I think, I operate with a pretty healthy work-life balance that kind of favors life, usually.
It's a healthy way to approach it. I think you're going to be producing better work and working far more efficiently by doing that.
And that even started in my 5th year of architecture school, so the all-nighter was the thing to do. And
did you ever once pull an all-nighter?
I pulled a bunch of all-nighters, but I
never
pretty much got it out in 5th year. But then I realized after that sure, I was sleeping, but then there was the sort of cultural side of that I missed out on a little bit. But I had 4 other years of all-nighters to live that culture.
Yeah, I found my personality, how I worked, as soon as we got a project, I would go nonstop on it. Just constantly engaged on thinking about it and working around it. And I found that I finished most of my projects probably a week ahead of time. And then I had just a week of coasting at the end, which was great because I was able to go surfing and stuff.
So you're never the student to change your whole project the week before it was due or something?
No, not really. But it was, they were always done, and it was just odd. Like if I have something hanging over my head, I can't rest.
Yeah.
So
I can relate to that.
And so what do you think you'll wish you did less of in 10 years? Or you've basically answered by saying you're focusing on saying take the time to put into relationships and the things over the next 10 years. That's right. I
proactively
making that a priority.
So 10 years from now, hopefully there won't be something that I can say I wish I
had done less of.
Yeah.
All right, but if you had to think of the weaknesses of Kevin Moquin, There's got to be like a Call of Duty. I wish I had played less
Yeah,
Call of
that's
Duty
right.
or something.
Well, certainly, yeah. There's time I wish I would have, watched less TV
Right.
or those days I let myself out early. I wouldn't be crushed under all these other obligations right
Right, but
now.
those days you got let out early, maybe you went and spent them with your
That's
son,
right.
and those
So
are great
that's-
moments,
So
and-
that's right. How do you do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess we can project a crystal ball into the future, but you don't get one really
Yeah, that's right.
to know.
Yeah.
But well, cool. It's been really good catching up with you again.
Yeah.
I think it's been 2 years since I think we ran into each other over by the Nickelodeon.
Yeah, that's right. Every
last-
now and then we run into
Yeah,
each
kinda,
other in the
"Hey,
old port.
How you doing?
Yeah. So do you remember when you first started photography, you did the Marvin Window trip? And so
Yeah.
and then I was on that trip as well.
I was
remember.
just talking with someone about that the other day, but that's basically what I used to start my whole career as just getting a foundation of a semblance of a portfolio to show people.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Ron Quinterio before that, I was like,
Yeah.
hey, I agreed to go on this trip before I had decided to stop doing architecture. I've decided to stop doing architecture. I don't want to waste, or lie to you or whatever. And
Right.
he was like, don't worry about it, man.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
I was like, all
But
right.
I remember you talking about that on that trip, and so it's been fun to watch how that's evolved for you. And
It's been fun for me to watch.
yeah,
Too.
yeah,
But yeah, that was amazing how Minneapolis just has incredible architecture.
yeah.
That was
yeah.
that was
good
neat. Was it the Jean Nouvel theater? That was like
Yeah, the
purple
big-
that we went
yeah,
to, and
the
there's the
big
gold
cantilever.
medal. Yeah, that and it
Yeah.
was kind of like a yellow box cantilever, and that was a really interesting trip. I love that library that had that long cantilevered piece out over the street. And
Yeah, that's right.
yeah. And I got
the-
to fly in the front of the plane as we went
Oh,
up
I see.
to.
I got to fly in the back.
Oh.
That's good. That would have been fun to see in the front seat.
Yeah, on the way up, I got to sit co-pilot, which is concerning. What if that guy had a heart attack or
That's right.
something?
And it's
I don't
all
know
up
how
to you.
Well, guys, say your prayers, or
Yeah.
make it right with yourself. But yeah, that was a while ago. But yeah, that was a good trip. Need to go on a couple more of those. so.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for coming down to Biddeford.
Yeah,
It's
nice to
been
see you.
good catching up with you again. Good to see you and to hear about everything's going on. Be sure to catch Kevin's article that he's written around what is the subject really again, if you want to describe that.
Oh, it's an interpretation or an impression of Phillips Exeter Academy Library by Moquin in nearby Exeter, New Hampshire.
Yeah,
So-
so I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in architecture go see that library at Exeter School in Exeter, New Hampshire. It's one of the best pieces of architecture in the world.
Yep,
And not even
absolutely.
saying that, like exaggerating. It really is incredible. And when you walk in, it from the outside, as we were saying, it's like meh. It's fine, but on the inside, it's like a geode. It's just incredible on the inside. But catch Kevin's article on the AIA Design Theory article on Maine Home Design coming up. And thanks a lot, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Trent. Nice to talk to you.